Back in March of 2020, it was actually the week before the COVID shutdowns. I was invited to go to a meeting hosted by ATF at the federal building downtown here in San Diego. And it was meant for the FFLs. That was the audience, were San Diego FFLs. And it was presented as, kind of a routine, update kind of meeting. I was surprised when I showed up there that there were very few FFLs. And there were a couple I didn't even recognize. And I pretty much know all the FFLs in San Diego. So it was a fairly empty room, but across the room there were a bunch of suits. And I thought that was odd. I thought maybe they were going to be part of the presentation. They looked like they were dressed I thought they were part of the ATF or something like that. So at the time, they kicked off with a presentation by he's the federal district attorney. So if you break the law in this part of the country and it's a federal law, this guy, he's the federal district attorney. His last name was Brewer, and really good dude. This is under the Trump administration. He gave a great speech. It was actually very motivating. And frankly, the whole speech was, we need your help, FFLs, in going after drug cartels, which is motivating. Hey, okay, yeah, we don't want bad guys to get guns. So if drug cartels, if FFLs can play a part in stopping drug cartels from, taking guns and giving them to bad people to do bad things, well, let's pitch in. Let's roll up our sleeves and do it. That was the attitude I got from the FFLs that were there. And I thought, hey, this is great. Well, he gave his speech and then walked out. And then it was turned over to basically the head of the ATF in Southern California. And they started talking about, we got this form and we want to make sure that you're filling out section 3 of this form correctly, whatever. And I started thinking to myself, the rest of this meeting is going to be boring. I'm probably not. It's going to be, pointed towards FFLs, and I don't think I can get anything out of this meeting. And I thought, what I do want to talk about, though? I want to see if I can get some insight into what is the proper way to do an interfamilial transfer of a firearm that is not on the roster. So, for example, you have a parent who lives in Arizona, and they want to gift you a Gen 5 Glock, which isn't on the safe handgun roster. At the time, it was even worse. There were very few guns that were on the roster. Now we're starting to see more on the roster. But the process and procedure wasn't real clear. And I had already seen some people get into trouble trying to obtain off-roster pistols, and they weren't attempting to break the law. They thought they were complying with the law, but then it turned out they weren't. And then FFLs, I'd talked to different FFLs, and everybody kind of had a different procedure. And some of the FFLs just said, we're not going to mess with it. It's too messy. We don't want to break the law. So I thought, well, at the very least, maybe I'll bring this up. He's probably not prepared to talk about it, but let's see if we can get some clarification. So after he was done explaining his slide, I said, hey, I got a question, and asked him about interfamilial transfers of off-roster pistols, interstate. The next slide was all about that. And the next few slides were all about it. And basically this ATF guy, the whole point of his presentation after this mundane section about a form and how to fill it out correctly, the rest of the presentation was telling FFLs, if you're doing these transfers, we're going after you and we're going after the people who are receiving, the Californians that are receiving these transfers. They were adamant. And the next question was, well, wait a minute, this is state law and you're federal law enforcement. And he was prepared for that. He had a whole slide on the various ways, the various laws that they feel that Californians are breaking when they do an interfamilial transfer of a roster of a pistol that's not on the safe handgun roster. And it had to do with lying on a federal form. It had to do with interstate commerce. But they basically were like, yep, if you are breaking this, if you're doing this procedure, if you're breaking this state law, according to them, breaking the state law, then you are also breaking federal law and we can enforce it. And he introduced a guy who was an expert at tracking the money. You know, if you received a gun, then they were actually looking at bank accounts. If you received a gun from somebody out of state, you know, and as a gift, then they were actually looking at bank accounts. Did, you know, $500 or $600 or $1,000 leave your account, and then did it show up in their account? Like, they were tracking people's financial business in order to catch them doing the, you know, an interfamilial transfer, because it has to be a true gift, right? You can't actually purchase it because that's a whole other set of.
So they were looking at the timing of the purchase versus the date of the transfer.
Correct, and an amount.
Trying to get
right. Yeah.
evidence to prove a straw purchase.
Yeah, if a Glock's $600, you know, and you were gifted it in January, well, did $600 leave your account, you know, in early January, and then show up in their account in late January? You know what I mean? That kind of thing. So this was serious business. And I remember, you know, basically the questions were, well, wait a minute, the big boss that you had come and talk said, you're going after cartels. You know, you're going after gun cartels. Gun cartels don't care if they have a Gen 5 Glock or a Gen 3 Glock. Like, this isn't going after, you know, cartels. And it became very clear, crystal clear, that this was an initiative of this, you know, head honcho here in Southern California, that this person decided that that is what they're going to concentrate on. They weren't going to go after criminals, right? They're going after people that are just trying to obtain normal guns in what they think is a legal way, you know, in California. They decided that was the threat. They wanted to go right after gun owners, not gun owners that had a history of violence or a history of crime or anything. I got to tell you, I walked out of that meeting intimidated. And I am certainly not easily intimidated by a bunch of bureaucrats or whatever. But these federal agents and the fervor with which they were looking to bust gun owners was extremely intimidating. It was very worrisome. And they were going to go after the shops for lying on a form, you know, breaking federal law, you know, if they did these transfers. They were going to go after the receiver of the firearm, and they were going to go after the gifter of the firearm. And they were serious. They took a lot of time to make sure that people knew it was basically like never okay. You know, it was never okay. And then another interesting thing happened. I walked out of there sincerely intimidated, which I believe was absolutely their purpose, you know, was to scare and intimidate. And I rode down the elevator in the suits that I mentioned earlier, right? So there were a bunch of suits across the room that I didn't recognize. The suits were people from San Diego City Attorney's Office. They were there to get educated on how to more efficiently and easily go after gun owners. And they absolutely were interested in, hey, their questions were along the lines of, hey, how do we hang more people on this? You know, how do we go after more people on this? How do we prosecute more people on this? There wasn't anything about crime. There wasn't anything about career criminals or stopping crime. It was absolutely geared towards gun owners who were simply trying to obtain normal firearms that are available to the rest of the country and in a way that they thought to be legal. They weren't there to clarify the law. They weren't there to say, hey, let's explain how this actually can be done. They were there to find gun owners and stop them from being gun owners and hang them. That ATF agent is a guy named Paul Ware. And I think we even have a picture of Paul. Paul Ware, W-A-R-E. Paul Ware was the head of that meeting. It was crystal clear that this was his initiative and his brainchild, that he was more than happy to go after gun owners. And I got to tell you, this guy was responsible for the whole attitude of the meeting, and he still works for ATF. And I know we've had a lot of discussions on the Trump administration and what they're doing, their DOJ, to help protect the Second Amendment, which is fantastic. They have Harmeet Dillon, who in their civil rights department that's going, hey, this is clearly a civil rights violation, what they're doing in certain states. They have Pam Bondi's office who's saying, hey, we're going to, protect the Second Amendment. We're not going to go after gun owners. They have, the ATF has changed. They've made a lot of positive changes. But for the first time, I'm publicly naming this guy. The Trump administration, if you guys want to help gun owners in California, get rid of Paul Ware. Fire him. He should not be in a pro-Second Amendment position in the ATF. Not under the Trump administration. I don't care where he goes. I don't care what he does. But he should not be working for the ATF. He is absolutely a predator when it comes to going after sane, trained, law-abiding gun owners. This guy is not in it for, to protect the Constitution. He's certainly not in it to protect your guns. So he works for the ATF. He needs to go. He needs to be fired and let go. Gone. No more him in the Trump administration. And I also wanted to tell that story to further illustrate just how anti-gun the city attorney's office is in San Diego. So there you go. There's your story time for the day. Any comments, Alicia?
I don't like that story.
I got to tell you, I don't. If anything, I whitewashed that story. It was enormously intimidating. I'm not going to name the people I was there with, but I've talked to other FFLs that were there, and they changed the way they conduct business, not just when it comes to these inter-familial transfers and, roster, off-roster, guns, but the way that they actually formed their business entity. Mm-hmm. They put layers of protection because they walked out intimidated too. It was really, really horrible. I think, so then the next week, by the way, COVID happened and everything got shut down and the whole world changed. I think that if had COVID not happened, this initiative would have blown a lot of people up. I think COVID kind of derailed what they were attempting to do to an extent. But it was bad. It was really bad, Alicia.
Just processing that.
Yeah.
I will tell you, FFLs are already so under the watchful eye in so many ways. There's already so many ways that they're attempting to be shut down. Their businesses are affected. And I honestly wasn't aware of this one.
Yep. Pretty bad.
Unreal.
So, I don't know. I'm just a guy here in San Diego who, has a little podcast here and works 7 days a week on, a local Second Amendment organization. But I'm hoping to get this message about Paul Ware and the ATF as far up the chain as I can. And I hope they'll take this seriously and remove him from his position of power in the ATF. So there you go. All right. There's my story. Hey, thanks for watching Gun Owners Radio. I hope you loved that clip. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and follow us on social media. And check out our website at gunownersradio.com.